I think about a lot with entry-level employees and a lot of them coming out of college, but it's really just the expectation they have going into their work. And one thing that we did talk about was, the entry-level designer, the junior designer wants to be, progressing in their career. They want to jump to that next step to being that senior designer, or maybe eventually being the creative director. And I think that it's one of the things you mentioned, and having clarity about where you want to go. It's so helpful. What are the expectations that universities are setting for students in terms of salary, in terms of career progression, and even just timeline of role? Because I think as the business leaders, it can be frustrating to see sometimes the entry-level student want to put in 1 year of work and then become the creative director.
Yeah.
Or the compensation. It's the other part of that, clearly. So one is the title and the prestige job after a year, and the other is compensation right out of the gate.
And I think a lot of this isn't necessarily set by the universities. I do want to preface with that. We understand that a lot of it is even set by social media, and just the content that people are consuming, and the peers that they see now, not just in their local community, but their peers around the world. So that it's not just on universities by any means. And I think people should strive for high standards, but I know that Chris and I have both seen people coming out of college for entry-level positions, expecting, salaries that come much later in your career. And there is value also, not necessarily in just taking a bad salary or a lower salary, but also in doing more of the production work, doing the lower level work for years at a time, and maybe even having that expectation that is going to get me more reps so that I can become stronger and get more perspective and have more understanding. So anyways, loaded question. I'd love to hear just from your perspective, what are the expectations that you are setting for the students that are coming out of your program?
So the expectations that I'm setting for my students here at Bemidji State that go into, so we have different roles, like we have graphic design, we have interactive multimedia, we have digital illustration and animation. We have a new program called Event Planning and Project Management that takes students through the detailing process, the estimating process, and eventually the project management process. And I've worked with industry and 2-year schools to kind of create this conversation and narrative for organizations. So we can say, Chris, if you're looking for a project manager, how about you hire a detailer from Bemidji State? They have education in project management. We've set the expectations that they will eventually become a project manager. So much money is made and lost in the project management process that just taking a new graduate and throwing them into the project manager role is probably not the greatest path for success for them or the organization or the client. But how can we start them as a detailer, move them into an estimator, and then move them into a project management role over a series of time? Whenever you move that project manager into an estimator role, then you hire a new Bemidji State student into that detailer role, and then they become an estimator. The estimator becomes a project manager. And so we're working with industry to create academic programs that set some of these expectations.
I'm sorry, Satchel, I am not aware of any other academic institution you've been on this for a couple of years now. At least you and I have talked about this, where you see the industry's needs. You see where on each side of the designer position, right, is account management and project management and production planning. And so I totally applaud that you're looking at expanding the curriculum at Bemidji, and placing and say, this is the next step. This is the next place. And by the way, the companies, the owners are listening and watching and rooting, because this is the place we want to go, where people have the full scope of skills. So I love what you're doing.
Yeah. Fantastic. And then, well, thank you. But the other thing is, I'm always telling our students that when they graduate, yes, they've conquered this mountain of a 4-year degree, but they are at the bottom of another huge mountain. And every time you achieve there's always another mountain, except for only a few. And I like the students to think of the first 2 years after graduation as an extension of their education, except they're not paying for it, they're getting paid, and they should find a job that aligns with their aspirations for what they're trying to achieve. And the challenge is that Bemidji State has, over the years, I mean, the program started the idea of the program started in the early 90s. I 10 years after that went into the program, and nobody had heard of Bemidji State when I went through the program. And now Bemidji State is a well-known entity within the Experienced Designers and Producers Association and the event industry. And our students are making a good salary. I think that if you look at the top 10 salaries out of higher ed, you see a lot of engineering degrees, but they're making in the 60s and sometimes $70,000 out of college, some of these highest paying jobs. And our students are being offered this kind of money, and this is a challenge. It's also like I'm grateful that our students are making a good wage out of college. A lot of our students are taking out debt to finance their education. The good part about Bemidji State is it's a state institution, and the tuition is relatively low. I think that for what the students are getting, for what they pay, it's a great investment. With that said, when you are making a larger salary when you graduate, the expectation for the student is that it is not an extension of their education, but rather it's game time and it's time to perform. And so I would, if you're making hypothetically $40,000, you're given a lot more latitude with your time potentially to walk around the shop, take a Friday and go to the
mall, the furniture store,
the furniture store, the
place that inspires you. Yeah.
NeoCon, whatever, CES, whatever show inspires you, and just seek inspiration on the company's dime. When you start making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000, it's like, okay,
the rules are more rigid. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're being hired to help an organization and be a part of a team, generate income, and provide a income for all those that are participating. And while there's a lot of revenue generated in a design department, we still need to be mindful that there's somebody that needs to answer the phone at the front desk, and there's other people that are maybe non-revenue positions that help the organization stay alive and continue a successful culture. And that's what being a part of a team is. And so, I really think that there are benefits and barriers to every salary that you're given. If you're given 40, you have a harder time paying back your loans. If you're given 60, you can pay back your loans easier. You maybe don't have to have a roommate. There are certain luxuries that you can afford. There's trade-offs for everything.
Can I give you this is a soundbite, a mentor. When I was in my 20s and I was a developing contributor, full of confidence, this guy, I was in the financial industry, and he said, Griffin, here's the deal. You're going to spend the first 10 years of your career being grossly underpaid. You're going to spend the last 10 years of your career being grossly overpaid. It's the 20 years in the middle that you're going to end up carving out your lifestyle from and supporting your family with. So that's the yin and yang. Now, those timelines might have changed a little bit, but somehow, Satchel, that's the expectations I think some of those students have to have. And it's really what you're saying, and that is, but actually they have a choice. They might end up with a $40,000 opportunity with more flexible boundaries. They might be given a 60,000 right, but guess what? You are going to have to move and relocate and pay what those rents are in that major market city. And maybe that's good for you, maybe it's not. But the point is, the last 10 years, you get to be Stephen Ross. You get to be Dana Esposito. You get to be Satchel Josephson, right? But you don't get to do that in the first 10 years of your career. And the people, our listeners, I'm sure, are going to know those names, because in the hallowed halls of all those wonderful creative institutions like Bemidji and SCAD and FIT, there are some rock star names. And as we've been reminded today, Satchel Josephson is one of those.